Who the fuck steals a Walmart kettle off a front porch? My personal belongings were going missing from our front porch and our backyard on an irregular but constant basis. We'd only moved in a few months before, but all of our neighbors seemed to have their guard up about me and my boyfriend. So many questions kept swirling in my head. Were they the ones stealing from us? Was it because they knew we smoked pot? Did someone not like our pit bull? Was it because my boyfriend has hair down to his ass? Likely a combination of everything, but to be quite frank, I was sick and tired of replacing my shit. One day, a chatty neighbor told us that the police had shown up asking questions about us. We found this odd, especially since we were the ones constantly calling them to report things missing from our house. So when the police came to speak to us about our missing property, I asked why they'd been inquiring about us to our neighbors. Their reply was that someone we knew had reported us. We had been reported by this mystery person because random cars would stop at our house and bring in suspicious gym bags. My boyfriend and I were flabbergasted. How do you explain yourself to a neighbor you barely know? Who was this person that cared to know how many people visited our house? Were they keeping a tally of license plates our friends owned? What was a non-suspicious gym bag? Was I being watched right fucking now? How deep did this community watch person's obsession with us go? To add to the mystery, homeless people and neighbors walked up and down our alleyway all the time. The first few months that we were settling in, all our neighbors, even 2 blocks away from us, would stop by our back gate and would peer in, and they go, "Oh, Natty and Joe no longer live here? Hi, my name is blank." Our house had been the meeting house. We had apparently had a big fire pit. Joe and Natty had had an open door policy, and people would come over any evening to play a game of cards and have a few beers. What I'm trying to say is that there were a lot of potential suspects. But the most obvious suspect was the man me and my boyfriend had named the Screamer. He was an oddball of a man, the typical on the spectrum East Banner. He was in his late 60s, fastidious in his landscaping, shrieked aloud when spiders touched him, and sat on his park bench in his front yard watching over his kingdom. Whoops, I mean our block. Anytime what I assumed was a spider was around, he would squeal, try to shoo it with his hand, and then perform a big stomp. He would be sitting on his bench, serenading our block with his classical guitar on a sunny weekend afternoon, when the music would abruptly stop, and with a scream, he would get up and try to swat a teeny tiny insect away. He was the most obvious suspect to us because he spent all his free time staring at our house. We believed at this point he intimately knew our comings and goings. We felt this way because we had installed video cameras to the front and back of our house since things were frequently being stolen. So for hours, we could see him stand at the threshold of our property, speak to himself for a good few minutes, and then walk back across the street and sit on his bench looking at our house. One summer evening, I left a handmade Moroccan wool rug to air out in our fenced-in backyard. At around 2 a.m., the man living across the street from us walked into the yard, picked up the rug, draped it around his shoulders like a king with a velvety cape, then royally sauntered off our property with it. This was the final straw to me. The Screamer needed to pay for tormenting me in my own house and making my neighbors think we were oversized duffel bag smuggling bandits. Within the month, the perfect opportunity presented itself. I came home late at night, walked into our house, and flipped the switch on the lights in the hallway. Boom! On the ground was the biggest wolf spider I'd ever seen. This was my fucking golden opportunity. I swiftly moved to the kitchen to grab a Tupperware container. My plan was to trap the wolf fucker under the Tupperware and then slide a piece of paper underneath and then carry it across the street. But the Tupperware was too small, so I rushed back to the cabinet to grab another, and when I turn around, the spider is moving down the hallway towards a vent. I know my chances now and that my time is dwindling. I'm standing near the vent, but behind the spider, trying to hold the container over top of this tarantula. I'm far enough she can't touch me, but close enough I know the Tupperware will drop in the appropriate way and enclose her for safe passage to the outside world. The Tupperware lands, and she starts to freak out, thrashing against the Tupperware from side to side, looking for an escape to this jail she's found herself trapped in. She's so big that as she's jumping from side to side, she's moving the Tupperware. I hold my hand over top and I try to slide the piece of paper underneath. She sees the bright light, clambers towards the opening where my paper is being slid, and wiggles her legs from out under the side of the container, and I squeal And in a dexterous, quick move, I flip over the container in my hand, now having the paper on top. But she's so big, I can feel her running around inside the container still. So gingerly, but far from away from my body, I hold our precious savior and navigate myself to the front door. And my boyfriend opens the front door, and in the dead of night, we walk in tandem across the street towards the Screamer's property. Our spider savior is laying at the bottom of the container, patiently awaiting whatever we have in store for her. And as I peel off the paper, holding her back, and then I angle the opening of the container to an appropriate location near the house, she makes a mad leap out of the container, out of her cell, and directly onto his front yard bench. She obviously was on board and knew exactly what we wanted. The next afternoon, as we're having tea in the living room, I hear a scream.
Jane's mom was the director of sport at the college, and she needed reliable volunteers for their fundraising. We worked Monday nights for months and months, suffering headaches and stinky clothes, selling game cards and color daubers to chain-smoking bingo addicts. Thousands of cards, daubers, cigarettes, and nacho cheese stains later, my parents dropped me at the airport with a notarized copy of my baptismal certificate as ID, my dad's bank card instead of traveler's checks, my first string bikini, and my first fake ID. Well, to be fair, it was a real ID. It just wasn't me. It was Anne Margaret Toes from Kamloops, British Columbia. She had curly hair and big cheeks, and I could really pass for her if when I passed it to the bouncer, I immediately looked up. And things looked up a lot. I looked up at Moose McGillicuddy's, the Red Bull Bar, the liquor store, countless nightclubs and lounges. In fact, I was rather good at throwing my head back, and we discovered the delight of half-price happy hour. Mai Tais, Singapore slings, laying on the bar and actually having shots poured directly into my mouth. This was heaven. Anne Margaret Toes was so friendly. She had all of her new American friends eating out of her hand, telling them stories in Canada, struggling to clean our igloos without melting it with a steam cleaner. How hard it was to find a decent dog sled waxer, and oh my God, yes, she knew Fred, and she'd be happy to tell him hi for you. Anne Margaret Toes convinced the night clerk at our front desk of the hotel that she only spoke French, which sent the guy scurrying for a French-English dictionary every time he saw Colleen and I come in late at night. But I digress. This day, we got up early and rented the last 2 blue and white mopeds to go snorkeling with dolphins and various marine animals in Hanauma Bay. Getting there ended up being a little slower than we anticipated because for some reason there was a lot of mud on the ground, and the road had been rainy, and of course we got lost twice. But we finally got directions from this really cute guy in a Jeep while we were stopped at a red light. When the light changed, he and his friends drove off ahead of us, and Colleen and I decided to gun it to get there quickly too. But I hadn't noticed that while I was sitting there chatting with the cute guy, the rear tire of my moped had sank down into a mud puddle. So when I gunned the motor to race off, instead I spun in circles. Instead of leaping forward with gusto, I was struggling to keep the bike upright and was going to crash around and around. But finally, I braced and got it to stop. That's when I realized that my ankle, instead of being protected by a fender, was actually stuck to the muffler. In shock, I pried my leg away from the burning piece of metal, leaving a significant chunk of skin still attached. I stared up at Colleen, who was by this time 2 blocks ahead, excited to go see the cute guy in the Jeep. And I bit my lip, pulled the moped forward out of the mud, and drove as fast as I could to catch up with her and get to our destination. By the time I got to Hanauma Bay, my whole foot was red with blood and the open gaping wound was throbbing. I raced to the lifeguard station to get help. They absolutely freaked out, running around, not knowing what to do. But suddenly, they calmed when they realized this injury was not ocean related and they could not be blamed. They cleaned my wound and patched me up as well as possible, leaving me with a huge band-aid of gauze and tape and orange mercurochrome kind of antibiotic. And then they lamented that I didn't have a more exciting story to share about my injury. However, I rode that moped back with my skin still attached to the muffler. And the last 3 days of the trip, Anne Margaret Toes threw back her head. She threw back a lot of Mai Tais and shared the story of a little-known predatory fish named Malacawana that wraps around your ankle and burns and bites at the same time, because rather than the raw fish diet most marine life like, this one liked barbecue. The story grew the more we threw our heads back, and we did a lot of throwing our heads back. So even though I never got to snorkel with the marine life in Hanauma Bay, thanks to Anne Margaret Toes, I had a great trip and a fantastic fish story.
You may or may not know this about me, but I suffer from a condition, chronic skepticism. I'm skeptical about everything, but in particular, I'm skeptical about the paranormal and the supernatural. Whether it's alien visitation, demonic oppression, Loch Ness Monster, Sasquatch, I don't buy any of that. So it's going to kind of sound strange when I tell you I believe in vampires. And I believe in vampires because I've personally dealt with them. Now, to be clear, vampires are not decadent Romanian aristocrats like Bram Stoker imagined, and they're not immortal pretty boys like you'd find in Twilight. And vampires do not suck your blood. No. Vampires suck you dry. So this girlfriend and I got a place together. Delayed reaction. This girlfriend and I got a place together, and a few doors down there was this massive renovation going on, being done by this group of guys who looked like middle-aged frat boys. And one of these guys never seemed to get his hands dirty. He was always wearing a suit and tie, and I figured, he's the money guy. So I come home one day and the girlfriend says to me, I was talking to one of those guys at the renovation. Oh yeah. That guy Bob? I don't know, which guy's he? The guy in the suit and tie. Oh yeah, the money guy. What did he have to say? Well, he told me he used to be a professional football player. That's the sound skeptics, man. So the next time I saw Bob, I went up to him and I was going to say, what's this bullshit you're telling my girlfriend used to be a professional football player? But very quickly, it became very evident that he had been a professional football player. 13 seasons in the CFL on 5 different teams, and one season, he was Offensive Lineman of the Year. So I got chatting with him. I got friendly, and we started talking all the time, to the point that the girlfriend started to describe him as, your new buddy Bob. Are you having a bromance with your new buddy Bob? No. Eventually, the renovation was finished and Bob moved into the house, and one day he invited me over. And when I went inside the house, I found it was completely empty. There was no furniture, there was nothing on the walls, no mirrors, and it seemed that the only thing in the house was a futon on the floor and a Offensive Lineman of the Year trophy on a mantle. So I said to Bob, where's all your stuff? And he said to me, oh, it's still in storage. I haven't got it out yet. That is the sound of a fearful skeptic. And I cautiously backed away because I had a very bad feeling. But unfortunately, I didn't tell anybody. And I went away for a long weekend, and when I came back, the girlfriend said to me, hey, your buddy Bob was over here on Sunday for breakfast. What? How? Well, he came over and he said he needed a ride to the impound lot because his car had been towed, and I was making breakfast anyways, and I felt sorry for him, so I made some for him as well. Why? Why did you do that? He's your new buddy. No, he isn't. He is a vampire, and if you let him into the house, he will be here all the time. She didn't believe me. In fact, she said to me, that's just stupid. But very shortly afterward, Bob's visitations began. And like any good vampire, he preyed upon us when we were most vulnerable, which is not the bewitching hour after midnight, but it's actually about between 8 and 9 a.m. Saturday, Sunday morning. I will never forget the sound of Bob approaching in his bat form, the wings flapping, which incidentally, those vampire bat wings sound exactly like flip-flops on pavement. Hey, could you lend me a couple of eggs? Better make it 3, and just a little bit of olive oil. Hey, you got a rake I can borrow? Hey, I heard you were going to Horseshoe Bay. Can I hitch a ride with you? Hey, my Wi-Fi's down. Can I jump on yours? What's your password? It was relentless. But finally, thankfully, Vampire Bob was killed. The only way a vampire can be killed. Anybody? How do you kill a vampire?
Wooden stake.
Well, that's for that kind of vampire. For this kind of vampire, you kill them by taking a sharpened wooden stake and attaching a realtor's house for sale sign on it, and then driving it through his heart. And after about 4 to 6 weeks, the house was sold, and Vampire Bob disappeared, never to be seen again, at least in his human form.
It was the last day of our short trip to Manchester when teenage curiosity took us into the local bookmakers, also known as a bookies or a betting shop. It was a space about this size, an open space, the walls plastered with promotional posters, stale smoke hung in the air, and there were a lot of old men in the old seats. 3 of us just sort of aimlessly occupied space, not really sure what to do here. The 4th, Rowan, was watching horse races on the TV screen. He convinced us to stay for one race so that he could wager the £25 he had left over from our trip. With this, we all looked up to the screens to learn more about the upcoming race and help decide which horse we should pick. We were going back and forth between the horses that were expected to win, the favorites, and those that were less likely to win, the long shots. The less likely a horse is to win the race, the more money you win if that's the horse you pick, and if that's the horse that wins. Therein lies the gamble. An old man sitting next to us overheard our dilemma and shared his insight. He said he'd been coming to the bookies for a very long time, for many years, and had had a lot of success with betting on horses, enough success to keep coming back. He also told us that in all of his years of betting on horses, he could never recall any of the times that he enjoyed winning when betting on a favorite. He encouraged us to go for something more. Go for the long shot. Go for that unforgettable moment. Now, 3 of us not having anything to lose, this made perfect sense to us. So there was one horse that we wanted Rowan to bet on. It was a horse that was wearing a green saddle and had green headgear. This I remember because green for go was probably the best justification we had for why this horse might go faster than some of the other ones. We had no clue what we were doing, but we knew this horse was a 50-to-1 long shot. That meant that Rowan stood to win 50 times his original wager if that horse won the race. Knowing how unlikely this was, Rowan said he would do it if the 3 of us did the same. I think this was his plan to get out of making the bet. If it was, it backfired in magnificent fashion, as we all agreed. Now we were all in, the 4 of us, £25 each, £100 total bet, a chance for us teenagers to win a life-changing £5,000 if this horse comes through. The old man next to us had basically become our advisor, and he helped to process our betting slip. Printed ticket in hand, excitement and anticipation began to replace the stale smoke in the air. We were ready. So were the horses. The race began. The gates opened, the horses charged. The screen was so small we had to lean in to see what was happening. It was green for go, and by golly, it was green going. Approaching the bend, going around the track, green was beginning to move towards the front. And that's when time began to slow down. Unknowingly, the four of us held each other's hands as we began to watch Green galloping forward. Emerging from the turn, there was only one horse wearing green, and it was moving into first place. The finish was there. We could see it. Green could see it. It was there. I will never forget the moment when it became clear, coming down the straight towards the finish line, the distance between Green and the finish becoming ever smaller, the chances of Green being caught becoming ever smaller. Gallop, gallop, gallop. So close. Come on, Green, you've got this. And then Green crossed the line in first place. I can recall every sensation in that moment. Pure exhilaration, unbridled joy, jubilation, celebration. We were hugging and high-fiving. We were beyond beaming with happiness. But something wasn't right. We could feel and then see all of the old men focus their attention on us, and they were disapproving in their gaze. It was as if we had disturbed some sort of unspoken etiquette. We looked towards our advisor. What was going on? Our advisor somewhat awkwardly gestured toward the screen and, almost embarrassed on our behalf, helped explain that, yeah, Green crossed the line in first place, but there was still one more lap to go. The reason that Green was a 50-to-1 long shot was because the horse was so poor in long races. As the lap went, Green went further and further towards the back and finished in last place. Looking back, our advisor was right. He told us to go for the long shot, go for that unforgettable moment. Green lost the race, but that horse gave us something so much more. That horse gave us an unforgettable moment that will live forever between us friends. And for that, we thank you, Green.